I have not been directly on this when I've been announcing the other sessions, and these lights are incredibly bright. Awesome, well, you've made it. This is the last session of the day at Dash, so congrats. If you are exhausted, that's a good thing. But hopefully it's good in the sense that you've been learning a lot. This is, gosh, we've got so much AI content this year, obviously, because it's really hot. But when I came up with the idea for this panel, it was primarily as somebody that's been an engineer for their career. And people are talking about building AI products, and generally in my career, you get told what product to build as an engineer. And so for me, it was, what do I need to learn? How do I incorporate this into my job? So I'm hoping that y'all are out there with similar concerns, right? As you're doing your engineering work, how do you incorporate things? So when I came up with the idea for this, I pulled together some amazing minds who are doing this. And so I'd like to kick things off. First off, I'm Jason. I'm a staff technical advocate at Datadog. So I've been responsible for a lot of the content that you've seen today. But I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves, and particularly, who are you, what do you do with respect to AI?
Hi, everyone. My name is Rima. I'm a data scientist at Datadog. I'm working on Watchdog, and more specifically, at detecting faulty code deployments for our customers.
Hi, I'm Randy DeFau. I work at AWS on the solution architecture team. I actually started in the data science field actually back in college. I did my master's thesis on autonomous vehicles research. Of course, that was so long ago that it was really difficult programming on 46 PCs. Like, there's no GPUs, there's no CUDA, there's no PyTorch, none of that nice stuff. So I thought, well, this is really, really too hard. So I'm going to walk away from that for like 10 years and come back and see if it's gotten easier, and it did. So I've been back in the analytics and data science space at a couple of companies for about 10 years now, and really focusing on that a lot at AWS. A little bit kind of splitting between the core data science side and more of the application integration side. So that's me.
I'm Sam Torchio. I am part of Datadog's information security department, not on the building side or the data science side, but on the side of making sure we have guardrails in place to build tools, build products in a secure way that's compliant with all of our customer and regulator expectations.
Boo.
I am the enemy.
He's the enemy. Hi, my name is Skylar Greca, and I work with product and engineering at Smartsheet. I don't know if many of you have used Smartsheet. During the last talk, they got into spreadsheets, and Smartsheet was created to solve the day-old spreadsheet problem. And I'm sure most of you remember the times when you were sending spreadsheets and emails, and that was kind of your way to collaborate. Well, if you're still doing that, Smartsheet could be a good option. But yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Cool. Well, in particular, when it comes to AI, as we think of the software development lifecycle, each of these folks have been involved in certain ways, all the way from how you develop software. I have chatted a lot with Skylar about that earlier, and incorporating that to the compliance and making sure we don't deploy bad code, all the way to operations and how you run things. But when we were talking about this panel, and I was like trying to assemble things and figure out what's the flow, Sam had the great idea. He's like, it's about AI, let's just plug it into ChatGPT. And that's what we did. So ChatGPT has created the outline for this session. So we're going to start with this. And it suggested that we start off with talking about the current state of AI. So for all the panelists, I'm curious, how do we distinguish between what we see as the real potential of AI versus the hype, right? The hype says just rub AI on it, or just incorporate that AI into your code. It'll be much better, and life will be fantastic. But how do we distinguish? Like, where should we start trying to figure out where we can practically integrate AI into the software and engineering work that we're doing?
Well, first off, I think a lot of the skepticism is coming from the 2017, 2018 chatbot hype. And I'm sure most of you remember that. And that residual is kind of carrying in. And so even when I look across product engineering teams or just any role at the business, there's just been a lot of hesitance in adopting it. So I'll just preface with that, and then I'll let Sam or Rima or Randy.
I think a good way of measuring like real value is continuing to just look at outcomes, right? You can talk about hype, but the real tangible things that we're able to develop and build is a great way to ground whether or not something's valuable is just output.
I actually did see just a couple hours ago, there actually is some real data now that's showing there's been a significant drop in software engineering job openings since the advent of like ChatGPT, roughly 3.5 and models of that quality. I mean, correlation is not causation, so it may just be due to other things going on, but there probably are some real impacts happening. And I think my sense is that it's going to make good engineers better. They're going to be better at doing all the things they spend time on, not just writing code, whether it's systems analysis or writing documentation or test cases or things like that. What I'm really interested in, and I'm not really sure yet, is if you took a really hard problem like legacy COBOL modernization, which is a horribly long and time-consuming process, costs millions of dollars. Can these models get to the point where they can make that easier if you don't really have the systems experts who are really deeply familiar with that code? And I haven't actually seen a data point on that one yet. So,
For me, honestly, I feel like there's a lot of hype recently because we don't have enough of awareness about what AI can do today. And I wouldn't expect everyone to drop everything and start learning AI and how to train models. But I think everyone could get some basic concepts of how our models even train, what to expect from them. And this will allow us to demystify a lot of the concepts and allow us to kind of have good expectations of what are the current limitations today and what is the way forward for us when developing a model.
And I often tell engineers and those on product that the first thing to do is just get in there. Even if you're skeptical on it, just try it out. And not even just at work, like try it out at home. I know when ChatGPT came out, the mobile app, it was like a great avenue because I don't like texting on my phone. So using the voice control, I could do it when I was driving or whenever. And so just by using it, you'll learn probably inverting the problem, knowing what it can't do or it doesn't do well. And that gives you good insight into like what's actually really there.
I'm curious when you mentioned that of just getting into it, and I want to tie that back to something Randy said about like it can make really good engineers better. And so I'm curious what level of engineer should be adopting things, right? Like we often hear about AI being like, treat it like it's an intern. Like it doesn't know anything, it's stupid, but it's good at doing automated tasks, right? Or repetitive tasks and things like that. So, should it be for senior engineers, a high level? Should everyone try it? Should it be new engineers? Who should be adopting this?
No, go for it, Randy.
Well, probably everybody. I'm telling my kids to use this stuff to do their homework, so I think certainly professionals should be using it. But I think really good engineers can probably be more efficient with this. I think maybe there's a case for like entry-level engineers, as you say, is they're just jumping into a new code base. They don't know, they're trying to navigate it, rather than using IntelliJ or something to jump around, like where is this implemented? What does this class do? Maybe now they can just ask a question of a model and get the information more quickly. Somebody mentioned once they thought that maybe mid-level engineers are going to be the least likely to benefit because they're already over that initial learning curve, but they're maybe not as proficient to know exactly what they want to do and how to instruct the model. But that's just a theory right now.
So I've noticed that, so my official role is a senior principal software engineer. I still write a lot of code on a day-to-day basis. And I've heard and I've seen studies that the more senior you are, the less you're going to benefit from it. And I've not seen that myself because with any of the generative AI, the more general your question is, your prompt, the more of just a general answer you're going to get. It's probably not going to be as useful. The more you can probe in and use some of your technical depth, you're going to unlock more rich results that are going to allow you to accomplish whatever. If it's building some algorithm, writing it, and getting it right the first prompt, or maybe it's after you continue to use it, and doesn't matter what level, you start getting used to training the context, and then maybe you have saved views that have all the context pre-filled in, and you use it for certain situations. Maybe it's for writing your unit test if you don't usually write, you don't do test-driven development, so it's like, hey, I can kind of bring that up to par. Or maybe it's just like you don't do your merge request or pull request descriptions that well, so I'll just have it automate and kind of fill in the gap for me.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's for everyone, right? Ultimately, it's a tool, and I think a tool is just something to be used in everyone's hands. I'll take the opposite end and say it's actually been phenomenal working mostly with a team of non-engineers. It's given them the capability to actually start writing their own code just by prompting things and getting scripts back with instructions on how to run it for people who aren't technical in the first place. And so you see that nearly infinite growth in their ability to code because they couldn't do anything before, and now they're writing their own scripts and running their own code.
I definitely agree that it's for everyone, and it can show very good promise, especially on short term. But I'm mostly worried about junior engineers because if we're talking about Gen AI currently, it offers a lot of breadth of information, but not a lot of depth. And it can currently solve easy tasks and not complex ones in the software engineering world. And that means that most of the tasks of a junior engineers can probably, no, that's a bit far-fetched, but they can benefit a lot from using AI to make their tasks. And I'm kind of worried it might impact their incentive to learn more about core software engineering concepts and dive deeper into those technologies, because that knowledge might just be enough for them to figure out their current tasks. And this attitude, I think, is a muscle that is built in us as software engineers from the day that we start. And I'm also a bit worried about the relationship between junior and senior engineers. Like if we're going less for them for help, I'm worried it might impact it on the long term when they have more complex problems to solve. But.
Yeah, I can give you an example of your point about junior engineers. So I don't know if anybody's tried the new artifacts feature in Claude 3.5. They just rolled out, I think, last week. But I mean, you just tell it, hey, I want a React app that does this. Like somebody's making emulators of old classic video games, and it writes stuff. And then it has a little preview pane. You run it right in your browser if it's in JavaScript. And it's fine, but I've never been a front-end developer. I typically write like C or C++ or Python stuff, but now it's like, okay, great, now I've got 700 lines of JavaScript I don't understand. So if I ever need to modify it, I really don't know what to do.
Cool. Well, continuing on with the ChatGPT outline here, let's talk a little bit more about that skill development, right? And this idea of you're a junior, you become dependent on AI, sort of, and then how do you transition? And so I'm curious, along with that, if you're adopting AI as a junior engineer or really anywhere in your career, what are some of those skills that you need to develop to not only leverage it better, but hopefully not become so dependent that you get stuck where you're at?
So I kind of noticed this, it was maybe like a month ago, and ChatGPT had an outage, and I couldn't get the results. And I'd kind of planned it into my schedule to do some summarizing before some meeting, and not having it. I was like, oh shit, now I got to go and, sorry, I don't know, can I guys? But I have to go and do this myself now. And I got it done in time, but I've become pretty dependent on it. And so I can see where that can be, especially more junior engineers that we've already talked about. So finding a level of where you're using it, but you're still ensuring you're getting some of that baseline learning. To me, just experience-based learning is how I operate. So I tend to get that just by day-to-day use.
Yeah, I think like with generative AI for any use case, it's really important to be able to define crisply how you're going to judge whether output's good or not, because there's not really a standardized way to do that across the board now with Gen AI. And I think for software, like you mentioned earlier, like test-driven development, I was always terrible at that. But I think it's really important. Like if you're asking something else to write code for you or refactor code, have a way to measure whether it's actually doing a good job or not. And so maybe you need to spend more of your time on having test cases, not only for functional, but also the non-functional aspects like the performance and the scale and things like that.
To that end, I think the most important skill is actually not being able to write code anymore, but being able to read code and understand it.
I totally echo what Sam said. And this is why I think we have to become even better code reviewers, which also means developing heavily core software engineering competencies, because it's not easy to review code, especially if you're a junior. And I personally have been using GenAI when I don't really know what I'm looking for. And because it allows me to trace it down to what piece of information I'm actually looking, that's where first, obviously, you have to fact check. And then I go and dive deeper into the concept that I need by finding the right articles or right Stack Overflow pages, I guess.
I'm curious, Rima, so you also, since you're building the tools that help discover problems, right? If we think less about writing code and more about the operation side, have you noticed, especially with the engineers that you're working with, of sort of a corollary with operations engineers? Like, are there things that they need to focus on more now that they have sort of autonomous agents looking for production issues?
What we try to do, I guess, is because we collect a lot of data about how your systems run, we try to help you focus on what we think is important to you. And I think that kind of mirrors, again, what I was saying on how I use AI. Like, when you don't know what you're looking for, it kind of pinpoints you to what we think is the right problem here. And then you branch from there, you double check, and then fix your problem if we're right. And if not, you keep looking. I guess it's the same problem everywhere.
Yeah.
Still,
Okay.
I don't think models can have a 100% perfect performance.
Cool. So I wanted to sort of pivot. Randy, you'd mentioned something earlier about Claude and this new thing, and it came out last week. And so I'm curious, on the flip side, right? We've been talking about how do you become maybe not so reliant.
Sorry.
It's okay. I will keep vamping until you're ready to speak. But I think there's the flip side, right? We don't want to become super dependent on it, but at the same time, like any technology, we have to stay in tune with it and keep up to date with things, right? Like the longer you keep just relying on doing things the same way, it's a fear with all of us as we're engineers, is like, how do we stay up to date with technology? And so I'm curious for all of you, aside from just using it, how are you staying on top of like, what are the new capabilities? How do you try them out and actually incorporate them into what you're doing?
So that's kind of back to what I was saying earlier. If you don't already have access to some generative AI on your mobile device, I would suggest starting there. Like, if you haven't started using it in your work application, that's fine. Maybe just start in your day-to-day. Get rid of some of those decisions that you're having to make. I've started using it even for dates with my girlfriend. And I've been using it so much in this case where she's kind of, she's like, you really can't be pulling this out when we're at the mall. And like, I'm using it, to compare prices or just like look for, for any strategy. But by doing this, I'm really starting to gain just a better understanding of when to actually be using this. And that's kind of translated even to at work. And I still use it at work, but just like I'm telling you, start there, just use it in any capacity. Because like after about a week, 2 weeks, you'll be like, well, you shouldn't use it for this case, or if I keep giving it this general context, it's not giving me anything great.
I think it's near impossible to stay on top of every single development, especially when you're seeing like exponential growth in the use cases of stuff. To kind of build off what Skylar said, I think focusing more on like the problems that you're actually trying to solve, right? A solution is only as good as the problems that it's facing. And so I think as you encounter problems, understanding whether or not that's something that Gen AI can help you with and augment your solutions is probably the right approach. Otherwise, you'll be overwhelmed trying to keep up with stuff.
Well, I might offer you a couple of probably not really great ideas, but some stuff I've actually tried. One is the things I really hate doing. Like when I write an email, I tend to be very brusque and to the point, and I'm not always good at managing up in my email. So sometimes I'll use generative AI to like make this more, senior management friendly email, and that saves me a lot of time.
Me too.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. You can also be a little bit snarky with this stuff. So I wrote a little app with one of the Claude models. When somebody gives me what I think is kind of a BS answer at work, like I think they're giving me a lot of words but not actually saying anything, I actually run it through like an obfuscation detector, and I tell them like, look, man, the Gen AI says you're not actually telling me anything. So.
Definitely staying on top of everything is very challenging because there's a lot of content being generated today about AI, being from AI experts to from journalists and entrepreneurs, and it's hard to keep up with all of that. I guess my strategy has been to really filter out all the content that I get. I try to follow AI experts that are very close to most important contributions in the field. And I listen to a lot of podcasts summarizing all the news, all the AI news from last week. I guess a 1-hour summary can be pretty good, especially that if you get hooked on the right podcast, they might be understanding what they're reading and actually tell you, well, why is this important? What's the impact? And moving forward, what to expect. So yeah, that's been pretty useful.
With Rima and everyone, when you see a post or you get an email that's obviously written with like ChatGPT, how do you feel about receiving that or reading it, and does it change the way you view that person? Or, I see it on like chat forums now, like, oh, that comment was written by ChatGPT, and so I'm really curious.
I think the only thing it does is make me question further the underlying intent of what that individual was trying to do, right? If I'm trying to reverse engineer the prompt that they then gave to the ChatGPT rather than just reading the words that they've said, and it's probably not the best thing, but it's effective.
I find that a lot of people really aren't good at writing anyway, so if they're actually using it to try to improve, hey, I guess that's all good. Sometimes it's hard for me if I see something that's poorly written. It's actually hard for me to figure out if it was done by like a model or that's just they're bad at writing. So I actually haven't solved for that one. But if somebody's using it to try to make their writing a little bit more crisp and concise, I think that's a positive.
I totally agree with Randy's point. And I guess the only difference is if I get a very long email that could have been summarized in one sentence, I would obviously be a bit frustrated. But I guess whatever works for everyone. Like if they don't feel comfortable writing it, they feel more confident. Going through a generative model to like reformat their text, I'm fine with it as long as I can understand whatever the intent is and it turns out to be right.
So we've been chatting a bit about personal adoption here, but I'm curious, we all work on engineering teams, right? And so thinking more about organization-wide, I think early on at Datadog, it was very much a like, it's available, you can use it if you want, you don't have to, it's a personal decision. But moving forward, like, how do you see adoption organization-wide across the company? And how can organizations successfully adopt it to equip everyone so that some engineers aren't seeing the benefits and leaving other engineers behind?
I think Bits is going to be really a game changer with the direction. It's not just because I'm here at Datadog. Some niche I've already been doing probably the last 6 months, maybe a year, is using and just plopping it from like trace output in Datadog and maybe some metric output and gaining insight from that. So where I can just output raw traces and gain insight into what's actually taken place or generate diagrams from it, and whatnot. So to have Bits in there with all your data and it can connect across your logs, traces, et cetera, I think it's going to automatically show the value of AI. And so I think that will be a great starting point. And once we're using it more, and that's just part day to day, that confidence will naturally come, even if your organization's kind of hesitant.
Well, my organization, we're customer-facing technical team, and so we do a lot of rapid prototyping and demo development, and so that's been easy for us to adopt. Just say, hey, we want to, instead of spending an hour writing CDK or CloudFormation or something, you can generally just automate a lot of that now, which is a big time saver. And Amazon's always been pretty decentralized about ML adoption. So as long as you're staying inside the InfoSec guidelines and things like that, there's really no barriers to starting to adopt things. But the other piece of our job is kind of taking information that we hear from customers back in and kind of analyzing what we're seeing. And so, we're a very document-heavy culture. And of course, that analyzing all those documents takes quite a long time. So for that, we've tried to use generative AI to help us just synthesize trends and so on. And that's where we had to be a lot more careful about InfoSec type of concerns, because now we're dealing with potentially sensitive customer data, and so that we did have to figure out how to solve for that in a pretty systematic way. But yeah, I would say internally we've been pretty aggressive about adopting where we can. The thing that slows us down is security is kind of fundamental to our business, like customer trust. So we have to always respect that.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue for me. I mean, I think the most effective way that organizations can encourage the adoption of these tools is to make sure that there is a happy path forward and guardrails in place for your developers to do so. Clearly, there's a lot of security, compliance, regulatory concerns that come with exposing not just your own data, but if you're providing for a customer, your customer's data to models and to different tools. And the best thing you can do is you're part of the security organization is educate the rest of your organization on how they should and can be using these tools to augment their day-to-day.
Yeah, because if you don't, people will start using it. You'll have stealth IT and the Gen AI flavor of that. And in fact, I remember last year I asked one of my kids' teachers how they were handling kids using ChatGPT in homework. They're like, "Oh, we make sure they're not using it." I'm like, "Oh, that's cute. It's so cute you think that." Anyway.
I also understand that a big obstacle to adopting these tools is that sometimes they're not good enough for senior engineers. Like they're like, if I were to do it, I would just do it faster. I can get to the solution faster. I can write the code with no bugs. Like at least I wouldn't have hidden errors in the code. I would just copy from an output of Gen AI. I think also the organization's role here to increase the adoption was to show the value to their engineers. Like if they are not convinced that these tools can be useful for them, they're definitely not going to use them. And second is to hear what their engineers have to say, listen to their concerns. Maybe the tool that you're using is not actually useful for your organization. Maybe you need another one. So yeah, I guess active listening will also help a lot of adoption of these tools.
I think an important way too of showing the value of these tools is focusing on what you're able to do with the time that's freed up by these tools. Like we can look at the direct value of its use cases, but time has an opportunity cost of what else you can be doing. And I think there's a lot of value in the new things that humans can focus on while the computers do the hard work.
And to go back to what Skylar was saying, like raising awareness on what these tools are good at and where they can augment your workflows, that will definitely help.
Yeah. All right. So we kind of had brought this up before, right? And it was the make sure that you're solving a problem, right? And so, that kind of begs the question of how do you measure the success, right? As let's say we get organizational adoption, everyone's actually using this. So I'm curious, how have you measured success, or what successes have you seen as you've done this?
It's always good to open the question, how do you measure the effectiveness or the productivity of your software teams right now? That's a great question to lead with. People love answering that. But it's hard, right? Like you're saying, but fundamentally it kind of boils down to the value of time in some cases. And some teams measure productivity in story points or burn down charts. Some companies measure it in terms of defect rates or things like that. But I don't think there's a universal answer for how to know whether you've actually made, say, a software engineering team more productive. Like you kind of know it when you see it. But it could actually be hard to measure.
What if we invert that? How do you not measure the success?
Some companies, I feel like there's maybe a little bit of a disconnect where they actually don't really know, and they feel that's where they start to see like IT and software as a little bit of a cost center rather than as something that's driving the business forward. But I think mature companies will know, like, hey, we're delivering products faster or things like that. They have ways to tie it to metrics that kind of make sense to the executives. But
Randy mentioned that sometimes we measure it using time, and it's not obvious in Comsec to measure it. I hope that they also measure like how making sure that this is not impacting negatively the team collaboration, and this one is also hard to measure, but like how engineers on the team are expanding their breadth and depth in those like in software engineering in general, like making sure we don't compromise learning opportunities just by adding these tools.
I think looking at curiosity has been something that I've been just very bullish on, and courage, because I think like more than ever we have to have courage to actually get past some of these like existential threats, and just I don't know, there's a lot of anxiety. I think that whether you show it or not, I think it's there because there's so much unknown with like how this is going to play out in the next 10 years. So I would say knowing, gauging what that sort of, I don't know, curiosity meter is and how engineers and just employees are diving in and using it. You could do that by just like tracking, I don't know, like we have this internal tool called Ask Me that's built on Bedrock. And we have just tracking of like by role, who's all doing Ask Me prompts in Slack. And that gives us an idea of like, okay, well, why are the principal engineers using it like 10 times more than junior and mid-level? It gives us little insights. Now, maybe it doesn't mean much, but I think it's still cool to see like that curiosity factor. And maybe there's a way, well, if your mid-level and juniors aren't, how can we kind of spur them to use it more and see if there is any value? And then you can measure that and figure out how to put a success on the value there.
I think that's a good point. I mean, starting with very kind of concrete input metrics, and by input metric, I mean it's something like we know people are using the tool this many times per week, and it's, you know, they're accepting the responses this many times. So that is a good starting point because it's very concrete, and then you can start progressing maybe to more mature things like, hey, you know, we have some data that shows that on average a team that looks like this typically would take this long to put this new feature in, and we've seen them get 5% faster or whatever it is. So, you know, measuring that output metric is a little bit harder, but if you start with like the very concrete tactical input metrics, at least you've got a foundation.
Cool. Well, I did want to leave plenty of time for all of you. So there are 2 mics, one in each of these aisleways. So if you've got a question that you'd like to ask the panel, make your way to the mic, and we will take some questions. We've got about 7 minutes left. So see people already heading out there. Let's start over here.
Okay, trying here. So it's interesting, like the hiring process. Do you see the changes of how to evaluate engineering skills? Like a year ago, my company was sending like a take-home assignment, and there will be live coding. And nowadays, so what are you teams doing?
So this is going to be pretty radical. Have the candidates ask questions that are supposed to be solved using generative AI, and have them share their screen, and you can start to see how they're prompting and where their evolution of prompting skills have gotten. Now, that alone can show you, okay, well, curiosity that comes in, like maybe some courage. If they've already kind of built those muscles, which I'm sure with a lot of you here, as you've used it, a lot of the productivity didn't really unlock for myself until maybe 6 months or 12 months in, and I continue to see these thresholds. So being able to measure that during an interview, it'll give you a good idea. I mean, it doesn't have to be the only thing, but I haven't seen many companies use that, but and it can be pretty counterintuitive. But I think there's a lot that you can learn if you know what that's going to surface.
That's an interesting take, right? Because I think of, as an engineer, like a lot of what I know as a very senior level engineer isn't actually how to do the thing, it's how to find the answer, right? And so like my skill is that I'm really good at Googling and reading technical docs and then implementing them. And it's almost the equivalent of that, right? You're like, how good are you at actually asking these AI systems for the answers and getting the right answer? Yeah, being resourceful.
Yes, that's a really good word.
Yeah. Got a question over here.
Hey, I'm using ChatGPT and also ChatGPT's Python extension on a small project. And I've noticed sometimes it unexpectedly will just simply lie to you. You will tell it not to do something. It will say, okay, I didn't do that, but it has.
You have to say please.
Yeah. How do you avoid this or know when it might be happening, or what are some strategies around knowing when, and I don't even know if that's a hallucination or just something else when it comes to like creating Python?
There may be a really tactical thing, like if you're having a long-running conversation with a model, what's actually happening is that the context that you're passing in every time is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And at some point, that does throw them off a little bit. Mm-hmm. So sometimes just starting like the effective equivalent of a new chat session could help. That's one theory.
Or just tell it to summarize whatever it has at this moment, take that and plop it into, but 100% agree with that. Long-running chats can be very problematic, depending on what models you're using. I haven't used the Python extension. I'll check it out. But I was having a conversation yesterday with an engineer on the open source side of Datadog, and he was talking about C++, and there's not as much C++ code from like newer. I mean, there's a lot of older C++, maybe 10 plus years, and it's problematic because a lot of the training is on very old versions, version 11 or before, and concepts weren't even available at that point, which is like one of the biggest game changers with using C++. So it's spitting out a lot of code that is just so it's taking 30 lines to do something that could be done in 1 line. So with Python, I could see that happening with, I don't know, like version 2 versus major version 3, and so things to be aware of. I haven't tried the extension, so I don't know.
I think also a very good thing to know is that generative AI models do not plan, they do not reason, they make good guesses. Given all the data that they were trained on, and they kind of, if I could say, memorize it and make the best good guesses they can. So a part of it is also to manage expectations. So it does make very good guesses. It will give you as many good guesses as you want, but then it's on us to fact check, make sure that whatever output it gave actually is relevant to your context.
Also, why you should not self-diagnose with generative AI. You'll get some very interesting results.
Thanks for the suggestions.
I think we've got a question over here.
First, I had a comment. We actually, as part of a migration tool that we built that just had poor unit tests, we would ask first we would do the conversion of the code, and then the next part of the job was, the script was to have it auto-generate unit tests. And we noticed that as you kept running it, it would actually degrade on performance because it kept the context. So we, every once in a while, had to essentially within the piece of it, we had to say, can you please go back to 0? Otherwise, it was like a pretty ridiculous prompt. It was pretty much the level of either go back to 0 or you're going to create code that's going to bring down our network or something like that. And that was a signal that we had to give it to actually start all over again to auto-generate the unit tests, which were they were solid, as long as the code base wasn't, the code that was getting migrated wasn't super complex. Anyway, so that I just wanted to point that out as well. The question I had was, so as a developer, when I was, I'm an EM right now, but as I was going up through my software engineering career, a lot of my job was writing code. And that sort of translated into essentially modes of failure where I learned something and grew from that. And that made me a better developer, which then lends itself as I grew up to a staff engineer to be able to read code at a different level, right? So it wasn't just I read a bunch of technical docs. Generally, when I read technical docs, all that really did for me was make my architecture, draw out architecture that was very resilient or scalable. But the actual act of writing code was really giving me the power now when I do code reviews, which I still do as an EM, where I'm like, oh, this is going to be a problem. Have we thought of this, this, and this? What worries me is a lot of the junior engineers on my team are using GenAI to auto-generate code. We have a code bot that does code reviews, and literally if the code bot that's doing the code review says very, very low of risk, we're just letting it go. And as this continues to go up, and then we also highlighted the fact that junior engineers need to be concerned as well because a lot of these tasks are getting automated. My first question as an EM, as my team is that how do I find balance? And I have some ideas on this, but it's kind of a struggle where it feels like in some cases I have to say use only this coding tool. Like you can auto-generate code, but you cannot use the auto bot to also code review. Or the inverse of it, right? Like you can't just keep doing this because at the end of the day, I worry if any of these engineers are going to get scaled up across the org to the point where they can move into mid-level engineers, where I can trust them an entire system because they're just not facing the same kind of scrutiny that I did when I was going up.
Good question. I think we're in a transitional period. The fact that we're writing code now, 10 years, 15 years from now, I don't know if coding is going to be really a big part of our job. I think there will be a shift of engineers probably with product, and it will become a single role. That's a prediction. But seeing where this is going, there's more of a generalist mentality that's building out, and the need for the glue, the weaving between all the work that's getting done, which is need of soft skills. And the hard skills will continue to get much better with AI, but we're going to have to continue to build those soft skills around it. And so, yeah, that's probably where I'd aim.
I think first things first, too, your kind of hunch is correct. Don't let the bots review bot-written code, please. But second, to your concerns about like junior developers and learning through failure, I think this actually gives you an opportunity to fail faster and have more instances of failure. Where I'd be concerned is not learning from those failures. And so I think it's important to fail fast, but also spend time with the code when it's failing and understand why, rather than just putting it back in and trying to re-engineer code development. But also emphasizing more skills on reviewing code. It's that exact instance of if we're going to generate code, don't let the bot review it. Force everyone to look at that, understand how it works, and then move forward.
Thank you.
Cool. So we are at time here. I know that there's more folks with questions, not only you who have lined up. So I'm going to cut things here, though, but our panelists will be around and available to answer your questions. But before we do go, I do want to give them one more round of applause. Thank you so much for contributing.